Welcome to today's webinar that talks about a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes when you're applying to positions. And I think in terms of what we're going to be covering today, it's going to be very, very helpful for you in terms of realizing the reasons that law firms are not interviewing you when you're applying, whether or not you're a law student or a practicing attorney. And, one point that I'd like to just make at the outset is there are different points in your career when you're more marketable than others. So if you went to a good law school and you're coming out of a good law school, that's some cases going to be the most marketable. If you are in a good practice area when the economy is good, that's sometimes the most marketable you ever be. When you get older, if you don't have any business, that may be sometimes the least marketable you ever be when you're going into a market that's very, very competitive. So it's important for everyone to understand the reasons that law firms are hiring you. I've been in this business for over 25 years, and I've gotten a very, very good sense of conditions that people will and will not get hired. I've also gotten a very good sense of the reasons people don't get hired. And so understanding what I'm going to be talking about today, I think is going to be very helpful for you, not only if you're doing a search for a position right now, but in terms of things that you may be able to do in the future that will help you get better and make sure that you're applying and doing your search in the correct way. Another point I'd like to make before we kind of get underway is it doesn't really matter who you are. Everyone can get a job. It's just following the right procedures, doing the right things to get one. So I think a lot of times when people don't get jobs, they think that, well, maybe they need to be doing something else. I mean, maybe the economy is just not cooperating. Maybe they need to do another career. And that's not always so. I mean, you could be absolutely the best candidate in the world and not get a good reception from law firms. I mean, one of the typical things that's kind of interesting is you have these very smart people that go to these top law schools and then take jobs outside of law firms and want to come back. And regardless of how good their qualifications are, it's very difficult to come back. So I'm going to teach you about a lot of these rules. I would recommend taking notes, writing down this stuff and committing it to memory is very important. And I'd also just like to say, as we get underway here right now, that I commend you for learning this information. It's you're in the top 1% of attorneys that don't allow themselves to kind of be blind to what's going on in the market. So as of today, you're not going to be blind to understanding the reasons that you're not getting jobs or not getting more jobs. And this is going to help you tremendously because you're going to be in a position where you know the rules. And if you know the rules, then you're going to do much better. And, I consider myself, you may consider me whatever you like, but I consider myself that knows rules and rules that will help you operate your career in a very, very effective way. And, any business, you're a product. So a lot of people, when they're attorneys, they just consider themselves that are working for other people. They consider I'm just working for other people. I'm going to get hired by the ones who like me the best and so forth. But no, I mean, you're actually a product and you need to conduct your career in such a way that you understand the best ways to sell that product and the rules that you need to be following in order to sell that product. So an example would be it's probably not a good idea to open an ice cream shop in Fairbanks, Alaska in the middle of winter. That's not smart. That wouldn't be a good rule of going someplace where the climate is not going to cooperate with what you're trying to do and people aren't going to have that need. So you need to understand these rules. And I'm going to lay out as many of them as I can today. I'm going to tell you why firms aren't hiring you. And when I tell you that, you can take those reasons and you can figure out ways to mold those in order for you to get a position. And so I'm very excited about this webinar today. I think this topic is something that is going to help you immensely. I think that if you absorb what I'm saying today, it's going to help you literally throughout the rest of your career. You will be able to take this information and learn when there's roadblocks in your search or learn how to improve yourself as a product and get more jobs. And it's people like you that are listening to this sort of information that end up going very, very far in the legal profession because you're learning things that other attorneys and other law students are not learning. So it's very difficult to get a job in a law firm. It really doesn't matter who you are. Every person that's looking for a job is going to have, regardless of who they are, is not always going to have the best, well, when I was in law school, there were people that were at the very, very top of my class and they have got 30 plus screening interviews and maybe they got 5 callbacks or 6 callbacks and 2 jobs. I mean, it doesn't really matter who you are. It's just not easy. And then the other thing too is it's not just your applications not being paid attention to when you apply and getting interviews. It's also when you go into interviews and don't get jobs. So I'm going to tell you why you don't get jobs when you go into interviews, why it's not always your fault, and how to make sense of all this, move beyond it. And I'm going to tell you also that the reasons you're just rejected even before you get in the door, which is very important, and how to succeed in the job search where others fail. Some the people often they get the most jobs from me. It's very, very interesting, and they're not always the best applicants. The best applicants will often very, very quickly give up, but the worst applicants often realize they have no other choice, and so they kind of go all in on their searches, and they end up getting jobs. When similar situated candidates that aren't half as good don't get jobs. And so you need to understand that a rejection is very, very common in legal professions. It's exceptionally common. I mean, when you're a young attorney or in law school, I mean, you start getting a sense of this. And as you get more and more senior, and if you're in a bad market, it can be very, very discouraging for people. You feel like you may have entered the wrong profession. You feel like you won't be able to continue in this profession. You feel like you're not going to make enough money to pay for your loans, pay for your family. All these sorts of issues are very, very common among young attorneys and even senior attorneys. That some of the saddest things are when someone gets very, very senior, like meaning 8 to 10 years out, and they start looking for a job and they don't find any positions. They don't know what's going on. I've seen so many situations where people just are senior and they just give up and they get out of law firms when a law firm could offer them a very good long-term career. So the people that get jobs really are the ones that are able to proceed, learn the rules that I'm going to tell you about today. And for most openings, not all openings, but for most openings, there's always going to be more attorneys out there looking for positions, and there are positions to fill. Now, there's some exceptions to that. And some of the exceptions are we have a lot of firms sometimes that have openings in rural areas of the United States. There's all sorts of areas that are kind of off the beaten path where there's just not a lot of attorneys or people applying for them. Obviously, that's a good idea to apply to those kind of places, but some of these firms can have openings sitting there for months with no applicants because no one wants to go there. You also have all sorts of states and things in middle America and towns there where there's not enough attorneys. And there are exceptions to this rule of more positions and more attorneys and positions to fill. But generally, when you're in any sort of decent sized market, which would be large U.S. cities, top 25 U.S. cities, there's always going to be, most of the time, more attorneys looking for those positions than there are positions to fill. Now, again, there's another exception. There are law firms. I've seen law firms pay attorneys recently, and we're talking about this webinar is being recorded in getting close to 2025. I've seen law firms pay attorneys $40,000 a year. Now, obviously, those law firms are not going to get a lot of applications or a lot of interest. But when you start getting in places where it looks like there's opportunity, where there's good pay, and where it's in a decent sized market, then it's going to be difficult. And it's also going to be difficult when the market is in bad shape. And right now, at this particular point in time, this webinar is very, very important to be watching because this economy is in bad shape. The number of people getting interviews is way down. Number of job offers is way down. And that's a reflection of things that are going on in the economy that you have no control over, especially when you're trying to work with mid-sized to larger firms. Why is that a problem? And why does that have nothing to do with you? Well, large corporations at the present time are laying people off. They're laying a lot of people off. They're throwing a lot of people into the job market from them as well. But when they start laying people off, they start spending less money. And when they start spending less money, they stop using attorneys as much on the outside. And then those attorneys have less things to do. So that it's sort of a ripple effect that goes through everything. And right now, I'm seeing a very, very serious ripple effect. And as a matter of fact, it's probably the largest ripple effect I have ever seen in the legal market in my entire career. So people that I know in the real estate industry are talking about how warehouses and things are sitting empty. No one's renewing them. When, a couple of years ago, there were people lining out the door trying to buy houses in the real estate market are being, marked down and marked down and marked down. There's just a lot of problems. Credit card default rates that are late are going up and up and up. So there's so many problems in the economy right now that it's very, very important for you to understand what's going on if you're in a practice area that can be affected by that. So you need to know that a lot of the rejection you may be experiencing sometimes, either when you go in for an interview and don't hear back or don't get the job, or when you're in a position where you're not getting interviews at all, you need to understand that a lot of times these things are economic in nature. What does that mean? It means that attorneys are not being hired and clients aren't spending money. And so you need to figure out how do I respond to that? And I'm going to tell you about some lots and lots of ways that smart people throughout my career have been able to get jobs when this sort of thing happens. Again, the legal profession can be very unwelcoming. Sometimes it just appears unfair. People go into are intimidated by attorneys from big firms, aren't at big firms, and it seems mysterious. And even the best law firms hiring the best of people, when those people go in for interviews, they often feel unwelcome. So when you're applying, it doesn't matter who you are. You could be a law student, an associate, or a partner. But the legal profession gives you the impression a lot of times you're just not wanted or appreciated. You don't have a lot of value. And that to me is discouraging. It's discouraging because it's not what people want to hear. I was talking to an outstanding attorney the other day. He was a partner in a good size firm in Chicago. He'd been there for like 12 years, developed some business, not a lot, like $500,000-$600,000 in business, and came to me and wanted to move firms and assumed that because he'd been at the same firm since he graduated from law school, that he had a lot of employment stability, assumed that because he was in a good practice area, it would be easy for him to move. And he had all these expectations that because he had such a great career, that he would be welcome in the market. And ultimately what I told him was, not only is it going to be difficult for you to get traction, at least at the firm of the same caliber, but you should probably stay there, because if they've kept you around that long, you're going to go into some place where it may be difficult for you to have that type of stability. You've got stability where you're at. So he was probably very upset, and maybe he'd gone to another recruiter, but in his particular situation, I told him to stay. One little point as an aside that I want to kind of make to you, and it's one of these things that's definitely not fun to hear, and it can be discouraging. In this guy's particular case, because he was senior without business, he was actually getting paid less third or fourth year associate, because the law firm knew that he didn't have any other options. So I think it's important when you watch this, and I see that all the time, by the way. I've even seen law firms pay partners less than first year associates. So all this stuff you're learning today is very, very important for you to have a good legal career, to understand the things that happen. I've been in positions many times in my career where I'm hopeful that things will get better. I'm hopeful that things will change. I'm hopeful that property I'm holding on to will go up in value in a year. I'm hopeful that so I can refinance it. I'm hopeful that business I'm in will continue to do well. Multiple businesses exist. I'm hopeful that all these great things will happen. And what ends up happening is, that hope that you have doesn't change the fact, the rules, and what's going on in the economy, or what's going on in the business, or what's going on in the real estate market. I mean, having hope is not always the smartest thing to do. Now, sometimes it is, but another times it's not the smartest thing to do. It can send you down a really, really bad path. And there's market forces that you are going to be exposed to in your career that can destroy your career and make it very, very difficult for you to find a position if you don't take certain actions and you don't do certain things that I'm going to talk to you about today. And it's very, very discouraging when you're not getting traction. It's very, very discouraging when you're not getting interviews with the types of firms you want. It's very, very discouraging when you have very good background and nothing's happening and you're not getting any traction. I had a candidate years ago, probably, 10 years ago, and she'd gone to Wayne State University Law School in Detroit, and she had been first in her class. So she'd done exceptionally well, and then had gotten a job at a pretty good, like one of the top 5 or 6 law firms in Detroit as an associate. And she decided, she was a litigator, she decided that she wanted to go to Chicago, and she wanted to go to New York, and she wanted to do all these things. And I worked with her for months. And I think she got maybe 1 or 2 interviews. But, how discouraging is that? Now, before working with me, she applied and been applying to those for years, and nothing ever happened. I'm not saying there's anything bad about Wayne State, not, that she was not the most outgoing type person, little homely. So, but that's discouraging, right? That's discouraging when you've done so well, and the market just isn't welcoming you in other areas of the country when you're trying to go to big firms. And why would that be happening? It's happening because They have better applicants that are already working, looking for jobs in those areas. And why bring someone in from out of state to another big firm? Now, had you been looking at smaller firms, it would have been a completely different matter. That's discouraging. It's discouraging when you do so well in law school, when you get a job at a good firm in your city and you're just not getting any traction in other areas of the country. So, I've seen attorneys, and you may be one of them. And as a matter of fact, you probably are. And people will go Indeed, LinkedIn, and these other sites, and they will be applying to positions all the time. They will be going, maybe talking to recruiting firms and trying to get interviews and doing all these things to do their best to get a job. And yet nothing's happening and no interviews. And they're just continually doing that over and over and over again. And I'm also going to talk to you today about some of the limitations of using sites like LinkedIn and Indeed, because when you use those sites, your law firms are widely marketing for jobs, and they're going to get a lot of applicants because a great number of people spend a lot of time on those sites looking at positions, and you're going to be applying unless you're the best applicant. It's hard. There are methods around that. Just as a plug, we have a company called Law Crossing that goes out and finds jobs, employer websites and law firm websites that may not be advertised. In most cases, they aren't. So you apply to those, you may be one of the only applicants. That's a method. I'll also talk to you a little bit towards the end of the webinar about some other things that we can do for you here at BCG to help you get a position, even if you don't believe you're employable, because we know places that other people don't. So we'll talk to you a little bit about that. And so that's, I think, will be a useful part of the webinar that we'll cover when we go to the Q&A in this webinar. So, when you spent months, you may often conclude when you've been doing your search that things are hopeless. But you may have been doing your search in the wrong way, like we're talking about. And even partners feel trapped. everyone often feels trapped in their law firm, their city, in their practice area. They feel trapped and they try to get out and they don't find any interest. And it can be very, very scary. Law firms, for the most part, will reject you before you even get in the door. A great number of them won't even respond to your application because they don't have the resources. Other times, law firms will reject you when you come in. So I'm going to explain to you. We're going to go under the hood today, and we're going to talk about the hiring processes that are going on that you're not aware of, so you can understand how things work, why it's difficult, why these factors are based on things that often have nothing to do with you personally. You should not involve your ego in this, and again, you should not feel badly when you don't get interviews, because there are ways to get them. When you're applying to firms, by the way, it's nothing other than being applying to. It's just there's a lot going on. So in the one sense, I like to bring up the example of when I open my mailbox every day. There's always mailers in there from people that want to redo my roof. There's mailers from real estate agents that want to sell my house. There's all these mailers and things and trying to get me interested in working with businesses. And my odds of responding to those are probably less than 1%, or maybe even less, I don't know, 1 in 1,000. But I will sometimes pick one of those things up and call. And that's how it works. And these real estate agents and roofing companies and things do not take it personally when I don't respond. They just don't. It's how it works. And another example, and so that's what they do. That's why you see all these Google ads or not. So it has nothing to do with you personally. It's just if there's a need at another point in time. Another quick example I'd like to give is I used to be a contractor in Detroit in the asphalt business. And so what would happen is there were these, back then it wasn't online, there were these publications that were sent around. One that I used was called the Dodge Report. And they would contain a list of all of the cities and school systems and businesses and things that needed to do the type of asphalt work, or any type of asphalt work. It might be using hot tar to fill in cracks, or it might be patching asphalt, or it might be sealing asphalt, or it might be paving, or it might be lines. And so they had all these different kind of proposals. And so I would always try to submit myself as an interested contractor to do this work. But they would get lots of proposals. The proposals would be for different amounts of money. The proposals would be they would have expertise and references from different types of jobs. And it might be larger companies. attorneys. They meant all these different things went into that. And once I bid on it, everyone else that did that kind of work bid on it as well. So I didn't, if I didn't get a position, I would realize, well, I got to have a bigger company before I do it, or maybe my bid's not competitive, or maybe I need better equipment, all these things. And so I wouldn't take it personally. I would just take each of these things when I didn't get the job as an opportunity to learn. So from your standpoint, you also need to be able to persevere beyond rejection. Nothing that happens here should be taken personally. You need to be able to make strategic decisions to broaden your search, and you never can give up until you have an offer in hand. You just can't. You need to learn from rejection before you get in the door, and you need to learn from rejection after you get the door. What could you have done different? So this is kind of the first thing. You're most often rejected for jobs even before you get in the door. And what does that mean? It means that the only way to be successful in your search is to persevere way beyond rejection. You cannot take anything personally, and you need to make strategic decisions to broaden your search, and do different things until you have an offer in hand. That's just how it works. You're not going to succeed unless you keep persevering. And if you're applying for jobs and not getting interviews, there's a lot of reasons you might not be getting interviews. And I'm just going to go through them kind of one by one. The first one is you're not applying to enough places. So the legal market is huge. There are tens of thousands of law firms in the United States in different size markets, different practice areas that pay more, pay less. And no one has a perfect background. And in order to get a position, you may need to look at 100 plus law firms, 200 law firms, 300 law firms, 400 in your practice area, the city you're in, and your experience level and more. That's what someone would do that is trying to get people interested in having them replace their windows. They're not going to expect that every place that every homeowner that they may send a mailer to is going to have a need. They're going to apply to a lot of people. Many of the most successful attorneys, like I said earlier, were by no stretch of the imagination the best attorneys. They were just people that were in this place where they didn't have any other option. So they applied to a lot of places before they got offers. They kept applying. They didn't give up. And that's the same sort of thing you need to do. You need to apply to as many places as you can. And you need to be very, very on it. And that's really the only way you're going to be able to get offers. So an example would be, and this isn't so much the case at the moment, but if the market for litigators was very slow in Washington, D.C. and Silicon Valley. So even if you have the best qualifications, it doesn't matter. There's not the jobs. The firms don't have the work for whatever reason. And so when I place people in those markets, typically what I'll do is I'll do very extensive searches. I'll have them apply to a lot of places with openings, without openings, firms that I know about that no one else knows about. I'll do this for them as long as I can until the market has enough opportunities for them. And a lot of times in the largest law firms, when things are slow, there's just not a lot of work. And you're only going to experience success when you're able to apply to a lot of places. That's just how it works. You're not going to get a good reception from the same places that everyone's applying to. So what does that mean? So great firm, Cooley Godward in Silicon Valley, if they have an opening for a litigator, they may get 50 applications. So if they're getting 50 applications, you're going to have to be among the best to get that job. So unless you're the best applicant in terms of your background and so forth, why would the law firm hire you? I mean, just think about that. Alternatively, maybe you apply to jobs in Sacramento, which is not too far from Silicon Valley. You can't drive, but there's not a lot of applicants there and you get interviews. So, and also law firms are businesses. So just one second. Okay. So you just need to be, the right attorney at the right time for the firm. Sorry, I had someone at my door during the webinar, but you need to be the right term at the right time. So, how can law firms make money from you when they're looking at you? You really can't deduce those questions without applying and seeing how things go. So sometimes they'll look at your resume and someone may have gone to your school. Sometimes they'll look at your resume and they worked with someone at your firm and they really respect your firm. Sometimes all these things can happen and you're just not going to know the answer to whether or not you're going to get a job unless you apply. But I do want to just address something, and it's a little bit unrelated to this, but I do want to bring it up because I think it's very, very important. I've done a lot of webinars about resumes. I've done a lot of resume review, all sorts of things about resumes. And a lot of resumes are really bad. So I would really encourage you to go through and take a look at these webinars and things I've done about resumes, because There's a lot going on there that people miss when they're applying to jobs that can make it very difficult for them to get jobs unless they have done the right things with the resumes. I mean, your resume needs to be focused on your practice area. It can't list a bunch of things that are going to put you on one side of a political issue. It can't be emphasizing your weakness. Like sometimes people put they got a 3.0 in law school and be proud of that when that puts them in the bottom half of their class. I mean, there's all these things you need to do in your resume. Now, this is not a resume webinar, but your resume is your marketing piece. So if you have bad marketing compared to other applicants, that's going to be very, very difficult for you. You need to your resume needs to market yourself in a very, very good way. So I'm not talking about that right now, but that's one of the things that's going to get you rejected before you ever get in the door with a firm. If your resume is bad, then you're making a mistake. So spend the time improving your product, which is your resume, because that can make a difference 99% of the time. I saw one resume once of a guy that he went to doesn't matter, an Ivy League law school. And he mentioned stuff about sexuality at least 17 times, a one-page resume. I mean, that's probably not a good idea. Anything that you do needs to basically look like you're going to be able to go into a firm and you're going to be able to look very, very strong and not be on the side of one political or social issue. Law firms don't like that because you're going to sometimes alienate half the people there. Other times you won't. So it's a risk you take. But the factors that are going into whether or not a law firm is going to interview you before you get in the door are often the amount of work the attorneys have at your level. So if they have an opening, then they're advertising that they have the work. But if you apply to a firm that doesn't necessarily have an opening, then they don't have. Then they may see your resume and realize that we're not doing work that we had. So that can be useful. Sometimes the firm's clients will need some of your expertise. So I had an attorney not too long ago that was a very sophisticated security attorney, and he was looking at law firms in different areas of the country and didn't have any business and was very senior, and found a firm that needed someone like him with this expertise. And it didn't have any business, was old. And it just these things can happen. So sometimes the law firm may not have an attorney who could do the sort of work that you do. So I had a thing happen years ago. It was kind of interesting. I had a woman that had been working for a big US law firm, and then for whatever reason, I don't remember, had to move to Seattle for her daughter. And she had been a partner at a big law firm, I believe it was in Las Vegas. And so when she moved, the law firm realized they didn't have any attorneys in that state, and it would take all these complex things to have her get a for the law firm to set up a business there and everything. So the law firm made the decision to let her go. And so she was in a position where she needed to find a new job. And because she needed to find a new job, what that meant is she had to go and try to find firms in Seattle that would hire her. And she was a trademark attorney, and there were none. So I did this thing where I kind of emailed all of these law firms around the country and said, I've got some really strong attorneys that do trademark work, that do work in all these different practice areas, like, patent prosecution and all these different kind of practice areas that are kind of difficult niches and so forth. And I ended up getting her a job in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which not even Grand Rapids, it was anyway somewhere in Michigan that wasn't a major city, and they allowed her to work remotely. So the idea was I found a work firm that did this sort of work she did. Sometimes you'll apply and there'll be people in the law firm that may be leaving shortly or have left, and the firm is kind of desperate for replacements. Sometimes the firm, like I said earlier, may be all about one political party. They may have the very, very strong and democratic politics or whatever. And if you apply to them and they see someone like you, they might be quite interested. But also, you might be alienating other firms like that. Sometimes the firm, like I said, they just may have an affinity for people like you or not. So you just don't know. But it's important to realize that anytime you put this affinity stuff on, it can actually hurt you sometimes as much as it can help you. And sometimes, they may want people who have experience working on the same client you spent a lot of time on. And then many firms really like working mothers. Other firms don't. There's just so many factors that go into a hiring decision. And the only way to really know like what's going to work is when you apply to business. But all these things on your resume that put you on the side of issues and things can help or hurt you, but you need to be very, very careful. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen someone with like diehard Republican politics trying to get a job in a market like New York or San Francisco, it's just not going to work. So you need to be very careful sometimes. And certain people do better from various backgrounds, do better than others. You can't control that. And the only way to apply that to solve that is to apply to more places. And so, limiting yourself to a few places is one of the most dangerous things you can do in your career. You just have to be very, very careful of that. And then, anytime you're applying for jobs, the odds are pretty good that there's going to be better applicants than you for a lot of the positions you're applying to. So, you need to realize that especially when you're applying to jobs that are advertised, what are the odds that you're the best applicant? Now, many times you will be, of course, and that's why people get hired. They get hired when they are the best applicant, but many times you may not be the best applicant. And all these things make you the best applicant. Be your experience, your stability, the quality of your current law firm, the amount of business you have, and all these factors. I mean, stability is important, for example, because if you've been leaving firms for a while, it looks like you're going to leave again. If you're not at a firm that has a bad reputation doing good work, that's not good. That they find better people than you, and portable business for more senior attorneys and everything. So regardless of how good you may think you are, how proud you are of your background, a lot of times there's going to just be more applicants for you for just about every position you apply to. And there's more qualified applicants than you, then you can't control this. You need to keep applying to more and more places. Now, why do I keep saying that? Like, why do I keep saying apply to more and more places? Why do I talk about your resume? Why do I talk about all these things? Well, the point is that being persistent in anything is one of the most important factors of anybody that's been successful. If you talk to Elon Musk or whoever, I mean, most billionaires are going to experience tremendous amounts of setbacks, and sometimes they'll fail, they'll go bankrupt. All these horrible things will happen, but they keep pushing through. They don't give up. They improve themselves. They make sure that they have a better product for the market. They do all these things. And when they do all these things, it helps them reach great heights. And they go so much farther than people that don't have that persistence. And most people do not have that persistence. Most people do not have goals. And so you need to have goals and persistence. And if you're able to do that, a lot of things will happen. One of the most common things is attorneys go to law school, and they will go to law school often because they know how much money you can make working at the largest firms. And the largest firms have always, for the past 40, 50 years, have always had these giant salaries and paying a lot more, actually more than 50 years, paying a lot more than average firms, doubled average firms and everything. And so people go to law school and they're like, wow, if I go to one of these great law schools, I can make much money. So this is what a lot of times people think. So they think, okay, well, these are the jobs I want to get, and I'm going to apply to them. And they don't get the jobs, and they're upset. It can happen when you're a junior attorney or in law school. It can happen when you get more senior. Oftentimes, senior attorneys at the best firms will decide that they only want to work at other major law firms. And because they only want to work at other major law firms, they limit the amount of people hired them. So when they don't get hired by these major law firms, they end up doing other things. They will go in-house and give up on their careers. It may not always be the smartest thing. And just keep in mind that most really top law firms are always going to have a lot of very good applicants. And you actually may be the best applicant, because I do run across people all the time that are just the best on paper. Their background shows so much strength. And when they go into interview, they always get the jobs. I have one candidate that says, just get me in front of anyone and I'll get the job. And he's always gotten every job that he applied to. One reason that people get rejected from a lot of firms, and this is something for you to be very, very aware of, is just as soon as any position becomes open, you need to apply to it. You can't wait and spend time thinking about whether or not you're going to apply for this position, because what happens especially when law firms promote positions, is they'll get a bunch of applicants in the first few days. They'll start interviewing from that pool, and people will start coming a little bit far down the line that they're interviewing. So they will be less likely to bring in people later than they might have been to bringing them in just as soon as they had it open. And sometimes, there's a bond that happens. So if the law firm's interviewing from the first applicants and they need someone they really like, they will want to look at a bunch of other people. They'll bond with those applicants, and then they'll feel guilty interviewing later applicants. And also, when a law firm is interviewing people, it takes time. I mean, it's billable time that they have to spend interviewing candidates. So they're losing money when they're interviewing. And so partners in most cases do not enjoy having to spend time interviewing people. I mean, They will interview them, of course, and if they need them, they'll have lots of great questions, but they don't want to spend a lot of time. And so, then it's kind of a sunk cost. So you're always going to do better when the position comes right out. It's like we get a position, we're always emailing our candidates, texting, trying to get us to contact us immediately about the position. And this is really, really important because if we can get people into law firms as quickly as possible, we're going to make more placements. And so I've discovered over the course of 25 years that this is one of the smartest things we can do. As an attorney, you need to be a law student. You need to be continually aware of what's going on in the market. You can't conduct your job search by logging into these different sites once a week or whatever and checking for jobs. You need to continuously monitor it. It's no different than what a stockbroker would do with their stocks. They would always be looking and seeing if things are going up and down and where the opportunities are, and they do that all day, every day. And you're an attorney with a product, and so you need to see, where can I sell this product each day? Where's the best place to sell it? Where am I more, where's it advertised right now? And you need to monitor the market. You need to, again, promoting one of our own products, but Law Crossing monitors the market, and each day it's getting all these law firm jobs and things on it, just in-house, but that are often not advertised. So you need to be aware of those. You need to be aware of everything that's in the market. If there were a site that charged, and Law Crossing doesn't charge very much money, but if there were a site that charged $500 a month to do that for you, you should do it because you're a product. You're that important. And so you need to do whatever you can to get out to most firms as possible. And as I said earlier, you need to apply to the right firm. So you may need to apply to firms that have people like you from your law school that are very strong in your practice area, or that may have an opening when other firms don't. And there's just all sorts of rules that you need to be aware of. And it's very difficult to get hired from a major law firm for most people that don't have the strongest, unless you have very well-defined experience in a difficult to train practice area, which would be like ERISA or patent prosecution, different types of corporate real estate, and so forth. I mean, the number one criteria from getting into a major firm is always going to be of the caliber of the law firm you're coming from. So I'm not trying to tell you not to set your sights high, but what I am telling you is you need to be very careful about limiting yourself to firms that may not hire you. And then when you are applying to firms, you need to find a place that's busy, that has a lot of work. You need to find law firms with a lot of work. Recruiters, the good ones, will always be kind of monitoring legal publications. So look at, what's going on law.com. They'll look at a different law firm. They'll look at different publications, and they'll learn where people are moving that have a lot of business. They'll learn what firms are busy and where not. They'll try to get applicants out to them. They'll network with other attorneys to find out who's busy. So you always need to be able to find law firms with better work. And a lot of times, some law firms will receive so many applicants, they don't know who's serious, who's not. So they need to kind of understand that, like who's serious with the job. So I've seen a lot of attorneys that applied to lots of firms in different cities they were located in before I got involved. And I did not get these candidates, or these candidates did not get interviews before I got involved, but they did after I came on board, because I was able to get the attention of the firms. I remember one attorney I worked with, he'd gone to Harvard Law School, and he took a job in Hawaii working for the U.S. I guess the Attorney General's office, and he had great qualifications. He applied to 15 large firms in Los Angeles, didn't get a single interview. He just kind of sent his resume out there. And then he came to me, and I started working with him. I was able to get him interviews at a ton of firms, like more than half of the firms that he applied to. So, and why did I do that? The law firm knew I was serious, that he was serious. I explained in a cover letter why he was serious. And then the law firm knew that if I was working with him, that he obviously wanted to move to Los Angeles. He obviously had a reason for doing so. And they knew he was going to be genuinely interested in the positions I sent. So they saw he was serious, where he didn't look serious before. So law firms need to believe that you're truly interested in working for the law firm. So the more focused your applications are, the better off you're going to be. And, unless for some law firms, unless you're coming through a recruiter that really is putting themselves behind you, it's going to be often very difficult to get interest from firms. And then another factor that's always going to weigh against you if you're applying to firms is that law firms want to believe you're stable. So they want to believe that you're going to come there and stay. And so, if you haven't been at your current law firm a long time, or you have so many moves on your resume, you're generally going to have a very difficult time overcoming this appearance of instability. Because who would you hire if you had someone, you had an opening for a fifth-year attorney, and one person can move 3 times and the other person zero? Well, the person that can move 0 times looks a lot more stable. You can't control that. And so law firms want people that are stable, because if you're stable, then it means they can put you on matters for your clients. The clients will get to know your work. The partners you're working with will have someone that they can depend on, and that gives them stability. But if you look like you're going to go to a law firm and simply move again, the law firm's going to look at you like a risk, and they're going to look for another candidate that looks more stable. You would do the same thing. And stable is good. So you need to look stable. And every time you move for inconsequential reasons or have gaps on your resume, it's going to make it more difficult for you to get another job. So having some stability and not moving for any reason, looking like you're stable is important. And there's other factors that go into stability, because with the way a law firm looks at it is, if you move, there could be a couple of different reasons. You could be moving to work at a better firm. You could be moving to get better experience in your practice area. You could be moving to be in a different geographic location where your family is. But a lot of times when people have movement on their resume, what that's really communicating is that's communicating that maybe they weren't doing a good job at the last firm and they were asked to leave, or maybe they have just an inability to stay at one place for a long time for whatever reason. So that's a red flag. So you need to avoid all these red flags in your career. So if you've been at 3 firms so far and you're a fifth-year attorney, I would recommend staying at my third firm quite a while, like 3 or 4 years before you move again, because you don't want to be in a position where you're going to look like you're going to leave. And just another point that law firms don't like. So if you leave a firm, you are undermining in some expense, especially if you go to a better firm, the people that are already there. So the people that are already there think, what's wrong with a firm? Why did this person leave? All these sorts of different things. And so that can hurt you as well, because the law firm doesn't want to make other people leave. There often is a sort of a cascade effect that when one attorney leaves, or 2 attorneys leave, and all these other attorneys start to leave, thinking, what's wrong with this business? I need to get out of here. And because if other people aren't happy, I should be unhappy too. And I'm sure you know how that works. I mean, what happens in most firms is people will start leaving, and they'll leave because they said the money's not better, it's better somewhere else. They'll leave because for all these different reasons, and it undermines the people there. There's the negativity that goes along with where firms have a lot of people that are leaving. And then just as I said earlier, like, your practice area can just be slow. Sometimes, the corporate market blows up in this. Other times, the market is so slow, there's so few jobs, there's nothing you really can do. And a lot of attorneys in these markets they give up. They were looking for law firm positions, and they gave up looking because of what was going on in the market. And so that can hurt you quite a bit. Other times I see this quite frequently. There are all these practice areas like bankruptcy or trademark, or all these practice areas that just hardly ever have any jobs. I remember my ex-wife was a trademark attorney in Palo Alto, and the market slowed down considerably in like 2002 or 3 when she lost her job. And there was literally only one other trademark job at a decent sized firm in all of California. She didn't get the job because she was in such a niche practice area. She actually decided to become a recruiter, which incidentally was an outstanding choice for her. And she's been doing it now for 20 plus years and very, very good at it. But this can happen sometimes when you're in your practice areas. And so, it's very difficult. And when you're in a situation like this where your practice area is slow and there's all these factors that are beyond your control, sometimes the smartest thing that you can do is to look at other markets. So you just don't confine yourself to the market you're in. You start looking at other markets in order to keep your career on track. Very, very smart thing. Not a lot of attorneys do that. And so when the market slows down, a lot of these careers will slow down. Sorry, it looked like my microphone. So a lot of times when these markets slow down in your practice area, there's nothing you can do, even if you're rejected, unless you come up with new ways of doing your search and apply to firms in different places in the country where there might be demand, instead of just getting yourself all worked up and upset about the fact that there's no jobs in your practice area. I'm talking about this, but I've seen so many examples, hundreds, if not thousands, of attorneys that were in markets that got too slow, and they did a couple things. They often would apply to smaller firms in that market that might have had work and try to find people that did. But instead of the largest firms who just broaden their searches in the market they're in, or they just went and looked for jobs in markets where there were no attorneys like them. I had one woman that was a corporate attorney that was unemployed for 6 months in New York and broadened her search to different smaller markets and had so many job offers, she was just overwhelmed and nothing would have happened to her if she stayed in that market. So, if you're in a market, in a practice area where there's no opportunities, you're going to feel like a pariah. When the market goes cold, it can be, disgusting what happens to the very best attorneys, but it's all about the product you have at that point in time and whether it's sold, it can sell. And it's very sad. And right now, I would say that, late 2024, we're in a position where the market is not good. A lot of corporate attorneys lost their jobs. A lot of real estate attorneys are losing their jobs, and there's just not enough jobs for them. There's some jobs for senior real estate attorneys and some other ones, but there's just not enough jobs. And so these people are losing their jobs and they're giving up, and they're often taking jobs in-house that aren't good for them. They're becoming contract attorneys. They're opening their own practices and practice areas where it's going to be very difficult for them to ever succeed. So it's very difficult for someone to leave a major firm and become a solo practitioner doing corporate M&A. I mean, people do things in bad markets that are difficult and difficult for them and have a major impact on your self-esteem and how you feel about yourself. And your job is such an important component of your life. I mean, it's something that you need security from. It's something that you need to feel good about yourself from. It's something that you need to feel like you're contributing from. It's something like you need to feel like you're welcome and you're doing something from. And when all those things go away, they can have a tremendous blow on your self-esteem. And if you are in that position, just realize that more than, of course, the legal profession has experienced that. And so what do you do? Everything is going to hell. Like, how do you keep your motivation up? How do you keep going? How do you believe in yourself? And you kind of have to just press forward, have a trust in a higher power or something that's going to help you if you take enough action. And instead of feeling badly about yourself, what can you do to improve your product? Like, can you make sure that you have a better resume? Can you apply to more places? Can you find markets where your services are in demand? I'll tell you kind of a funny story, and I tell this story a lot. Every several years, we would get calls, still do, we get calls from attorneys in these very small markets, and they say, I'm ready to retire. I'm no longer interested in practicing law, and I need someone to come in and take over all my cases. And they're in these weird areas of the country, like they could be in Indio, California, which is half hour from Spring. It could be in a small market in Oklahoma, all these types of places. And they're in these markets where they don't even know any other attorneys. And so there's always all these opportunities. And I'm not saying that I have any of those opportunities for you right now. But what I'm telling you is that you don't need to give up. You can always find someone to hire you, but you need to believe in yourself, and you need to take all these actions to make good things happen. But there's a story that I haven't told in a long time, probably 20 years. It's called the Garbage Man story. It may be on my personal blog, harrisonbarnes.com. But it's kind of an interesting story. So I started when I was in high school. I started this asphalt business, and I started it with a friend of mine who was sort of my partner when I started it. It's one story. He basically contributed $1,000, and I contributed $1,000. We bought a truck. We started this business, and we went out and did some work. And very early on, he didn't like the work, so he wasn't doing the work. He just ran me back. But I went out and I started this business. All these awful things happened. I bought these trucks, and they broke down. And then I had to fix them. Couldn't get them fixed. And money, and I figured out how to be fixed. And then I went out and I did these asphalt jobs, and all this stuff went wrong because I didn't know what I was doing. Anybody would teach me what to do. And then I had all these clients who were upset. I had this one instance where I had this 55-gallon barrel of asphalt sealer, and it turned over and went all over a street in a residential neighborhood, and I picked it up, and it was staining the street. I was completely overwhelmed by this business and all these awful things that happened. And it was devastating. You're out in the hot sun, like doing this work, and you've got all this asphalt sealer covering up your arms, and it's painful. And if you remove gasoline and use a wire brush, it's just awful. The work was awful. I didn't know what I was doing. And so it got so bad that I started the business while I was in school. And then about 3 or 4 weeks into it, I got in a position where I was like, okay, well, I need to make money from school because my parents were just like, we don't have any money to give you any spending money. And so you can go to this University of Chicago, but you're going to have to figure out how to take care of yourself from a financial standpoint. And I knew that I didn't want to work when I was in school. So I had Chicago starts in late September. So it kind of started by July. I was like, okay, I need to do something else. Like I need to make sure I have money from school. So I literally went and I became a garbage man for almost the rest of the summer. So in mid-September, I made enough money that I felt I had enough spending money for my school year, and I decided that I was going to go back. I'd done some work that wasn't that I was not happy about, and didn't do like a good job for these people I was doing work for. So I went out and I went to a hardware store because I wanted to make sure that I didn't have kind of this bad energy and bad karma surrounding me. I just felt like I needed to fix this person's work. They paid me, cashed the check. There were problems with the work, like I was putting asphalt sealer, certain parts of the driveway weren't covered properly. There was it just didn't look like they'd been done. So I went out and bought all the stuff to do it. And my confidence was way down. I felt like, what am I going to ever do myself to be successful? And I failed in this business. Confidence way down. And I got this call I didn't get a call. I was in a hardware store, I was Home Depot. I was in Home Depot and I was buying the products, and there was a guy there that was also looking at buying products, but he wanted to buy a lot of it. And he asked me all these questions, like, how do you apply it? Like, what's the best mixture? What's the best mixture of this asphalt sealant? What do you put it on? Like, what do you put it on with a squeegee? Do you put it on with a brush? Like, how do you put this on? What do you do for the cracks? All these sorts of things. And I sat there and selflessly talked to him and answered his questions for like 45 minutes or an hour. And then at the end, he said, would you be willing to go out and tell me what I should be paying a company to seal this condominium complex? And it wasn't a huge condominium complex. It was just kind of this big oval that went around. And I said, sure. So I went out, and it was late at night. It was like, by this time, I had to drive like an hour or 45 minutes from the Home Depot to where this condominium complex was. And I went there and I measured everything. And I told him, you should be paying about $2,500 to get this done, which at the time was probably like, what would be like maybe $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 now. And he said, okay, thank you. And then I got home from lunch from being a garbage man the next day, and I didn't have a car. I was riding a moped at that point. And I got home, my mom said, this guy called, and I took the call, and I called him back. He said, I'd like you to do it because you seem like you care about it, know about this, and I'd love you to do it for this $2,500. And it was like at that point, like the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Like this opportunity just appeared out of nowhere. And so I went and I was able to rent equipment to do the work. And then the cost me $500 to do all the work. And it changed my life, confidence. And I went and I did the best possible job I could do. I made sure I didn't make any mistakes. I learned from all my mistakes. And then I did this work, and I had just so much confidence. And it was just a wonderful thing, like going into my first year of college with all of this confidence, all of this money. And I bought myself a little car and just felt like the richest man in the world and so successful. And then I took all this experience that I got doing this work. I took it and I turned it into like a significant business all through college. And when I graduated from college, I was actually going to do this work. I had so much confidence. I was doing this large work and everything. And I was like, I know I can make like a lot of money doing this. And even people in my fraternity where I lived that didn't believe that I even had this business. And so I went and I was going to do it, but then I took the LSATs kind of at the last minute, and I was very focused on going to law school, but I kept wanting to make sure I got the best grades and the best scores. So I didn't take it immediately. So I just took it like in March, and I didn't get my results until April, late April or something. So all the law schools, except for a couple, told me the classes are already full. And so I was like, okay, but I did get waitlisted at some of them. And two or three good law schools. But I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this asphalt business and do what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. But even with my law school, I kept, with Virginia, which is sort of my first choice, I kept writing letters saying how much I wanted to go there. I kept pushing. I went out there, and after I took my LSATs, met someone that had gone there. I took classes. I stopped by the admissions office, did all these things. That was my goal. But I figured because I didn't get these LSATs in time, they weren't the greatest LSATs, that's what I would do. And so I was persistent. But the point I'm trying to make to you is, I had this business. It started because I failed, but I learned from my failures. And by learning from my failures, I went and I did the right thing. I fixed this job, and then I became selfless, giving away my knowledge and this opportunity and what I could do. I measured this parking lot just from a sense of doing good and not expecting anything in return. And every year, that guy gave me the same work to do every year. I would come back and do it every year all through college. And then I got bigger and bigger clients. And it got to the point where when I was clerking, I was clerking for a federal judge after law school. And I went out one weekend, like working a Friday or Saturday, and I made more money than I would make in like 6 months of working in my clerkship. I mean, I just had all this confidence. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because sometimes when things look down, like when you don't feel like you're going to be able to get something, you feel like you failed, when your confidence is low, like really great things can happen if you just stay focused and you do the right thing, and you don't you don't completely give up. And here I didn't completely give up. I guess I had. I didn't completely give up. I didn't completely give up when I went to law school, but I also didn't completely give up when I got this great lesson when I was working when I did this asphalt. Of course, I quit the garbage man job, which was just awful. Did this work, and things ended up working out for me, and it was a very nice thing. And I just but when I ended up leaving Michigan to move out to Los Angeles to work for my first law firm, a great thing happened there too. Like, this guy had seen me all over town doing all this work, and he wanted a business to run on the side, and so he ended up buying my company and buying it for a lot of money, and I used it for a down payment on a house. And within 4 or 5 years, I turned that down payment into over $1 million, and buying and selling properties. I'm just telling you, you don't give up on yourself. And then when I quit the practice of law, I had all this confidence to go out and do something else. So, taking risks, doing things, and just hoping that, knowing that somebody somewhere, if you're in the right space, is going to look out for you, is very, very important. So, anytime you're in a slow practice era, you should think about, like, what can I take based on what I've learned? What can I, what can happen? I mean, all these awful things can happen to people. Like, Goodman Proctor in Boston, like, obviously one of the top law firms in the country, great place. I remember years ago, like maybe 10 years ago, they had a couple of very big IP litigation cases settled, and they needed to let go like most of their bench, and people doing that with associates. And so all these people were sent out in the market. And I saw something that was really kind of astonishing. I decided, because BCG, we keep track of all of the applicants that come in. And but we also go out and we look at law firm websites, and we use service to this. Most of we do on our own. We look at law firm websites, and we see, like, who is who's at what firm, and then what are they doing. So we have the ability to kind of look at, like, this is what their LinkedIn profile said this day. This is what it said, 2 months later. And I couldn't believe it. All these people that were cut, they had gone to really, really good law schools like Harvard and so forth, great pedigrees, because Goodman Proctor definitely is a firm that hires the best people, has the best clients. All these people were let go and didn't know what to do. And so these IP attorneys in Boston tried to apply to work with more firms in Boston that did this sort of work, and they didn't succeed. So all these crazy things happened. Like, I looked at their resumes, and instead of failure, they had these very sophisticated intellectual property litigators have become solo practitioners or contract attorneys, or had given up on the practice of law, but they were just out. And I've seen that in other cases of IP litigators. Like, people just, their careers just end when something negative happens, and that can be very, very devastating. And no matter the quality of your background, the market can really turn on you if you're in the wrong practice area, or the wrong market at the wrong time. It just doesn't matter. All these things can happen, and you may experience rejection because of the market, and it has nothing to do with the caliber of the attorney you are. I mean, it has nothing to do. So what do you do in that kind of situation? learn from the mistakes that you have made or what you could have done differently in your career. You make sure you don't make the same mistakes again. You put yourself in a situation where you're going to succeed and where you're going to get confidence. Another big thing, and I just want to bring this to everyone's attention, is, and I've said it already, but applying to enough markets. So if you're open to more than one market and you're committed to looking for new positions, it's generally going to just be a matter of time before you succeed because markets work in weird ways. They sometimes you could be working in a major city and there's suburbs that are within an hour of that city. And then there's people in those suburbs that have clients that have work, or sometimes the work from major firms when the market slows down ends up going to smaller firms that have lower billing rates. You just don't know. So the best attorneys need to understand that you need to look on all attorneys that if you're not having success in your market, in your practice area, you need to look at other markets. And if you're being rejected a lot, one of my biggest pieces of advice to you is you need to find a market that needs someone like you. I mean, that's just common sense. I mean, but people don't do that. They get tied down to one area and they don't apply to every geographic market you possibly can. Now I'm going to make another point to you. And this is a point you may not want to hear, but I'm going to have to make it because it's important. When you're a young attorney, what a lot of the smartest attorneys I've ever seen before they ever become partners inside of law firms is they sure as hell do not buy a house. Many times they wait to get married before they have kids and obligations. They do all these things because they want to have the ability to move if they need to. They want to have the ability to they keep their expenses low. So by keeping their expenses low, they can save money, meaning their monthly output and so forth. So they do all these things just to put themselves in a position where if things go poorly, they have geographic flexibility or they don't have expenses that are exceeding the money that they're making. So, the more markets that you look at, if you have that ability, and you should give yourself that ability, the more possibilities you have to find law firms with work that can support you. And I think this should be fairly easy to understand, but most attorneys don't understand that. I mean, they fail to see the big picture of when they want and need a new position, and this is the big picture. And unless you're an attorney like or a partner with a lot of book of business, and having a lot of book of business makes you marketable, you can always be guaranteed of a job somewhere. But the biggest mistakes you can often make as an attorney is settling down in a single legal market. Settle down in a single legal market, you're it can, if the market turns and there's other places with the work, it can hurt you. So same thing with niche practice areas where there's not a lot of work. I mean, there's all these practice areas, like I told you earlier, that you could get yourself kind of backed into a corner. Like you're not going to get yourself backed into a corner for an insurance defense attorney because there's always going to be insurance defense attorney jobs in every market. You're not going to get yourself backed into a corner if you're a family law attorney. There's always family law work, regardless of always getting divorced. You're not going to get yourself back into a market if you're a trust and estates attorney, but you are going to get yourself back into a market if you choose you choose certain practice areas. Like I mentioned, trust and estates, or not trust and estates. I'm sorry, I mentioned trademark law and other things. So even before you're an attorney, you should understand like the things that I'm talking to you about now. Like what are the practice areas that are risky? Like what are the safe ones? I mean, litigation is always safe because there's always sorts of litigation. But real estate, no, real estate's not always safe because the real estate market goes through ups and downs. So understanding the practice here and what it means to your potential success is very, very difficult and very, very important. And when you're an attorney, you need to really be looking at every market you possibly can to find a position. I mean, this is critical, and you need to have the ability to do that. And the more markets you look at, the more success and the less rejection you're ultimately going to face. Maybe you'll face more rejection, but you're just dramatically increasing your odds of getting a job when you look at more than one market. And and sometimes we had the 2008 recession. We are kind of a recession at the moment, but 2008, 2010 was a bad market. We and some of our offices actually made more placements than when the market was good, and it makes sense because in recessions there are more qualified attorneys looking for work. But what happens in a lot of cases, not all, is that in most cases law firms that are working on smaller clients will often still have work. A lot of the work that the larger clients were doing will often move to less expensive regional firms. They'll put a lot of their corporate work there, for example. Like one of the kind of the most common things is there's some very good firms like in Rochester and Syracuse, and a lot of times work from New York firms will flow there while things are slow. Sometimes in recessions, there'll be markets that are kind of isolated from that recession. So like in the 2008 through 2010 recession, the gas prices were very, very high. So law firms in Texas were sort of immune to this whole thing of the markets. So if you're open to looking at more firms and more markets, you're often going to do much better than looking at firms just in your market. So when I convince attorneys to do this, the results are often very good. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to make as much money. That doesn't mean if you're coming from a major firm, you're going to be getting this sophisticated work, but it does mean that you'll stay employed. This same logic, I just want to make sure you understand, the same logic follows if you don't have great qualifications and are trying to get a job in a certain market doing a certain thing. It applies if you have great qualifications and are trying to get a job in a market where there's no jobs. But it also applies when you become a senior attorney, you don't have any business, and all the law firms in your market require it. These are just all things to think about and when you're doing the search. And then another mistake, as I said earlier, and this is one of the the biggest pieces of advice that I typically will give to attorneys about their careers that come to me, that hire me to do an analysis of their career. I do have that service, which I put that in the link chat or something at some point. But if you're only applying to firms with openings, you're putting yourself in kind of a bad situation, because you should instead be applying to firms that do the sort of work you're good at. And just concentrating on law firms that have openings means you're going and you're competing with every other attorney in the market that does the sort of work that you do. And that's not good. I mean, because all those people are applying. But if you've applying to firms without openings, the idea there is there's not going to be people to compete. So if the law firm does have an articulated need, they may hire you. And that's, again, a very, very important piece of advice. Law firms without unarticulated needs are the only applicant. Another thing that I, again, would recommend, say this several times, is you can spend all your time, if you want, going and looking at law firm websites and seeing what jobs they have. Many law firms will just post jobs on their law firm website. But when they have those jobs on their law firm website, they will accept applications. I mean, from people applying. But many times, if it's only there, then that's the only place it's seen. So how do you find those jobs? Well, we do this for large firms, small firms, mid-sized firms all over the country. We go look at law firm websites on Law Crossing. And if you do that, you're going to find positions that are not advertised, where you'll be one of the few applicants generally. Why is that the case? Because Law Crossing subscription site charges like $25 a month or whatever it is. And so people that are members are the only people that see those jobs, the only ones that apply. And you certainly do not have the time to look at thousands of law firm websites in your city. You may, but this can help. You can do it on other sites. So, but applying to firms without openings, are really is the most effective way, especially when the practice areas are slow. So these are just some of the kind of the more important things I would say. But I, again, recommend you do not give up. So many people give up. They give up often because they don't have a goal. They don't have a goal of being a certain type of attorney. They don't have a goal of succeeding, of being a part of a book of business. And unless you have a goal, you're never going to get there. So you need to have a goal. You need to have these goals, and you need to look at these goals every day. And there's all these books like Og Mandino, The Greatest Salesperson in the World, or Think and Grow Rich. And what they all say is you need to have a goal. You need to write it down. You need to read it before you go to sleep. You need to read it when you get up, and you need to have these goals. And you just need to train your subconscious mind to always, to believe that you can achieve these things, and you will. I did the same thing with law school. I knew from the second I was a second-year college student where I wanted to go to law school. I did everything I could to get there, and by some stroke of genius, or not genius, but when I had that goal, and everything eventually opened up. I couldn't believe it. It's happened with everything. I'll tell you one other quick story, and this is crazy, actually. It's pretty crazy. So years ago, like starting in, I believe, like the year 2000, I started keeping a vision board. And so, I would cut out of magazines and different things, different pictures of things that I desired for my life, whether it was a spouse or I was married, but I was first married. But, whatever it was, things I wanted, zest, things I wanted to, kind of person I wanted to be, and everything. So I started doing this in like 2000, and then I'd look at this vision board. I didn't do it as much as I should. Maybe I looked at it like once a week. Should have probably looked at it every day, but I looked at it, and I'd always come back and remind myself of it. And then in 2000, 2007 or 2008, I was in Malibu. We had a very small beach house. But anyway, and we were kind of driving back home. And we drove past this house that had an open house. And I said, hey, we should just stop here and look at it. And I looked at it and we loved it. And we ended up thinking this is the place we want. We went back and we told the real estate agent that sold us our existing house that if she had to buy it, let me know, thinking that nothing would ever come of this. And within 24 hours, she said, well, just so happens I'm taking someone on a house tour today. Within 24 hours, someone showed up and made an offer that was $500,000 more than we bought it for a year ago. And so I negotiated to buy this new property that we saw that we really liked. Well, I've been living there about 3 or 4 months, and I realized that I'd never kind of walked down to the beach from this one area of the property. And I walked back up from the beach. I looked at this house and I saw it from an angle that had been the exact same angle that the picture that I was looking at on my vision board. It was the exact same house. Like, how does that work? Like, all these things fell into place. The seller financed it. I didn't have enough time to get a loan. The house sold over. And all these miracles and things happen when you have goals and persistence. You don't give up. And it's worked for me. It's worked for countless people, and it can work for you too. But you need to really have a goal and want to be persistent. And you need to have someone that believes in you. Now, I believe in my candidates, but most of the time that people stop believing in themselves. So they stop, we send them firms that we want to apply to, and they stop approving them, and all these things happen. So the most important thing that I would just recommend to you is that when you're looking for a job, searching for a position, you can never give up. And just because you don't have success initially doesn't mean you can't succeed in the long run. If you have this, you need to continually be, or understand that you're often being rejected. You need to push forward, and you need to never give up and constantly readjust your approach. So there's a lot of reasons law firms will reject you. I'm going to tell you about them. I think that some of these reasons may be things you already know, but they're important to understand, because if you can overcome these reasons for rejection and you can put yourself in a position where or you aren't going to be rejected for these reasons in the long run, it will help you. It will also make you feel less badly about yourself if you're rejected by a law firm, because you'll realize that there was not really anything you can do. So here's a very kind of sad rejection that happened to one of my candidates. He had a long, great career in Washington, D.C., but was losing his job. Of course, didn't have any business. I got him an interview with a law firm in New York City that was very, very good. They were excited about him. He had not been interviewed in 20 years because not that long, actually, probably 10, 15 years, because he'd been working at the same firm, was losing his job, and in a very kind of panicked, upset situation. He took the day off from work and he rode a train from Washington, D.C. to New York. He was very excited. It was in a niche corporate area where there weren't a lot of opportunities, and just things were really looking up. You could tell his voice kind of more chipper, and he was talking about it, and it was a really good opportunity. And so we got to the interview, and the law firm had him wait in the lobby for over an hour and a half. And then he sat there waiting, and then the secretary came out and said, we're sorry, we can't interview you today. And something came up. And this is after he'd taken his train and everything. And they weren't particularly nice about it and professional. But the law firm never interviewed him again. Maybe there was some sort of emergency, but they said no explanation, the last minute change of heart, and simply didn't interview him. And the law firm kept saying, we're working on it, but they never interviewed him. And he was very upset. He ultimately got a job at a small law firm in Boston that was perfect for him, that didn't have an opening. They did the work, but it took him 6 months and left a very bad taste. These are some of the kind of rejections partners go through. But I had another firm that gave me a national search for a certain type of attorney. They were more focused on California, and I went out and I found two or three attorneys for them. They narrowed it down. They narrowed down a list of people that I found. So I was marketing the firm and the job all over the country, and I had an exclusive. But this was for their office for those in California. And they told this one woman that was very, very highly qualified, a litigator and all these things, that they were going to hire her. And it was just a matter of putting together the offer and so forth. And then I was sitting in my office one afternoon, and someone from the New York office said, we're taking a pass on her. And she'd been in a position where she was ready to quit. Her job where she was all these things and you couldn't believe it. And she was just blown away by how awful this was. And it was very upsetting. So, people like that are often interviewed and told they're going to be hired. And then they don't, something happens, they don't get an offer. And this firm that didn't hire this person was like, well, we know what she's probably making at her current firm. We don't pay that much. So we don't want to hire her. And that of course is something that would be very, very distressing for anyone. And again, this particular woman was paraded around all these different offices, 3 different states. And then, this is another example of a woman, where this happened with a firm. You went out and meet all these people, then the firm went dark and she never heard from them again. So, when a law firm hires you, for the most part, it's important to understand that most of the time the firm is hoping that you're going to be a really good fit. I mean, they really do want to hire you. Because when they're not hiring you, they are losing money because they wouldn't, most of the time they wouldn't be interviewed unless they thought they could make money from hiring. And so that's why they're bringing you in. They're bringing you in because you're a product and they think that they can make money from this product and they think they can make more money. I mean, this is the whole motivation of interviewing you. They're not interviewing you because they like you, or they're not interviewing you because it seems like a fun exercise or whatever. They're interviewing you because they believe from an economic standpoint that they may be able to make money from it. You can go into interviews. This is not a webinar about interviews, but you can go into interviews and doing all these things like saying, I want to work remotely 3 days a week. I have this salary demand that my people are making, or I only want to do this sort of work if I'm here. I'm not going to do other kinds of work. You can go and interview and blow it. And a lot of people do when they put their ego and all these things ahead of looking like the best applicant. But, when the law firm is bringing you in, I mean, it costs them money and would not bring you in unless they saw a use for you or that they can make money from you. But, things don't always work out. Here's some of the reasons that a law firm might interview you and then why you might not get the job after the interview. So it's always important when you're interviewing with a firm to just ask why they're, to figure out, why you're being interviewed. Now, I want to give you a good piece of advice, and I hope you've been writing a lot of what I've been talking about down, because this advice is very important, and it can help you, and it can get you more jobs, and all these sorts of things. This advice could be transformative for you. So I want to tell you this advice quickly, and I hope you will understand it. It's about sales. It's about how do you sell things. I was watching this guy, and I watched him for a while, and different videos of him, and I don't remember his name, but he was considered like probably the best sales trainer there is. He trains like higher insurance companies and different people. But he said that when a lot of times when someone goes in to sell this insurance, the insurance person is thinking about commission. They're thinking about what they need to do to convince the person to buy the product. They're thinking about how they're going to present all of their skills and how great this product is and everything. They're going in to talk to the client that way. All these sorts of things. When you go in thinking you need to talk all about your experience, when you go in thinking you need to do things a certain way, that's not always the smartest way of doing things. Like I've seen when the most successful people that I've hired for the highest paying positions in our company, those people typically do something different. They come and do an interview and they say, I don't know how much, I don't know if I'm the right person for this, but I'd really like to hear why do you have a need for someone like me? What is kind of driving this decision and allowing the person like me, myself, to talk. And this is exactly what the salesperson does. Sales training. It's like you have to go into a meeting and instead of trying to sell people, which automatically puts a guard up, you have to figure out how can I get this person, how can I get them to talk about what they need and what's important to them? Because if you do that, then you're showing the interviewer that you really want to try to help whatever they need, more work, people to do court, whatever it is, you try to put yourself in a position where that the person you're looking like you're going to help them instead of thinking about how much money you're going to make, what work do I do. You have to look like you have the ability to help them. And incredibly important. You have to really be in that position of looking like someone that is going to help the firm and in the interviewers. So that's just something I want to bring to your attention. A lot of times people, when they're asked questions at the end of the interview, and hope you're writing this down, will ask questions about, how soon can I start on the whatever. But the most important question is always ask things like, what would success look like the first 30 days? Like after 90 days, how could I be, what would it take for me to look like the best associate you've ever hired? And those sort of questions, because you're you're putting yourself in a position where you're looking like you're trying to help the person as opposed to not. So this is a piece of interview advice I want to give you, because that one little piece of advice right there could change how well you do in the interviews, understanding that law firms that are interviewing you typically do want to hire you because they have a need. So often when you get into a law firm position, the law firm will just have had better applicants. And what does that mean? I mean, it means often it's something you can't control and you don't need to worry about. But you do want to do the best you can in every interview. I have had these instances before where I've advertised, I had a small law firm in the city I work in, Malibu, California, where I would contact UCLA and different schools saying, I would like someone that, I contacted in September, that is still looking for a job and that has graduated and passed the bar or taken the bar. And could you send me applicants? And then I would see people would have these amazing resumes and that didn't get jobs, meaning great grade points, all that sort of thing, and bring them in, and they weren't good interviewers. And so they hire them. And even though, obviously not, it's a small law firm, not the best place to work. So what I'm saying is that when you go into interviews, you may not be the best applicant. You may not do as well. And if you did do the best you could and didn't get the job, then you need to try to figure out, what am I going to do to be a better interviewer next time? And often they're just interviewing people that have better qualifications. Maybe they interview 3 people, one they're hoping will be interested in them and one that's not. So if you don't get the job, it's nothing to kill yourself over, but you do need to learn how to really put on your A game and what you need to do to get a job. But law firm, there are people that can coach you with interviewing. I do that. But for all my candidates, I always coach them before the interview. And I tell them the things that they need to do. And they're not that sophisticated. It's things like you need to be likable. You need to look like you're going to stay around. You need to look like you'll do the type of things that they ask you to do. And you're doing valuable. It looks like you look like that means manageable and managed. And that's really a lot of it. But you need to learn how to be a good interviewer. Even if you're been out for a couple of years, most even law school career services offices will offer you career coaching. So there's a lot of things that you can do. Sometimes when a law firm doesn't hire you, they may have brought you in for an interview thinking that they're going to be bringing in some large line of business, and then that doesn't happen. And all of a sudden they don't make an offer, or the economy starts slowing. So what happens in recessions that we've noticed is law firms will, like our company might be getting like 30 interviews a week, say 30 interviews a week. And then all of a sudden the next week it's 20. And then 2 weeks later, it's like 7. And it doesn't mean that we're doing anything wrong, or the candidates are doing anything. It just means the economy is shifting or something. Or law firms may lose business, or they may have thought they were going to bring in business. I was hired at a firm when I moved laterally that thought they were going to bring in this giant oil case of like with Exxon or something. And they thought they were right there. And then after they hired me, and I started, they realized they weren't going to get it, and I didn't have any work to do for 2 or 3 weeks. So this kind of stuff can happen as well. So, law firms are never going to admit the reason that they're not hiring you is because the business is slow or whatever it is, or something didn't come through. But if it occurs, you just need to move on. If you've done the best job you can with interviewing, then that's all you need to worry about. Sometimes there's conflicts within the firm. So one partner may want to hire someone and then the law firm tells them we don't have the budget, or there might be a more powerful partner that doesn't like a partner that doesn't want the people. You just never know. There's all sorts of conflicts that can happen. Sometimes you may get an interview and then they realize there's a client conflict and where they can't hire you. So there's just all these things going on beneath the scenes, and you often can't do anything about. And sometimes all it takes is one person to not like you. It doesn't matter who they are. It could be someone that just doesn't like you because it could be a senior associate that doesn't like you because they think you're good for their job, or it could be one partner that doesn't like you for whatever reason. They just see you and you're not that kind of person. I remember I was interviewing once with a great firm, Morgan Lewis in Los Angeles, and I got into these interviews and everything was going incredibly well. I was having good interviews, and then I got into this one guy's office, and he and I were like night and day. He was wearing like a very serious suit at his desk, just very tight, and you could tell. There was no way that I would ever be able to work with this guy. He didn't like me, and Had I not interviewed with him, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have gotten the job. I would have gotten the job. I had another firm I interviewed once in Los Angeles, and I interviewed with this guy that was just extremely angry and asked these questions that were just, very off-putting, and I had a horrible experience. And that can happen as well. So, things can happen. And you can't control them, and you just need to move on. I mean, you don't want to go to work at a place where you're a bad fit. You want to go to work at a place where there's conflict, and so sometimes these are some of the best things that can happen. So often you're just not a good cultural fit. Each firm has their own particular type of culture and hires their own particular type of people. I can often tell, I know the cultures of certain, and sometimes it's best if you're not able to if you don't get a job, just to move on. So these are some of the rules just to understand. The largest firms are obviously the ones where you're most likely to get rejected. Most attorneys, yourself included, are going to get rejected from the substantial majority of firms that you apply to. So when I'm working with a candidate, and I have sometimes excellent candidates that apply for a job and they're the absolute perfect fit for that job, but most attorneys are going to get rejected from the majority of firms where they apply. So you can't reasonably expect, if you need to get a job or you want to do a job search, that you can apply to a few firms and think that everything is going to work out, because again, you are just the rules of the game. You need to all these factors that are going into it, the timing of your application, whether or not you're the best applicant, whether or not the firm has work at the moment. All these different things are going to impact what's going to happen. Some attorneys get rejected 80% of the time. You may be rejected 99% of the time. If it's a bad economy, you just don't know. And this is how it's always worked. And unless you're a perfect fit for a firm, you're going to be rejected from the substantial majority of positions in which you apply. And the only thing you can do, and the most important thing you can do, is persevere. You just can't give up. And if you have a shallow ego, you're also going to give up. If you don't have goals, you're going to give up. And you need to have those goals. Another point that I like to make in all these webinars, and this is another thing that you should write down, is when you're representing yourself, you are the client. So, I mean, you're your own client, meaning you have to represent yourself just as you would represent a client accused of a crime or trying to do something. There's all these movies. I remember there's an old movie with Paul Newman, I think, where he's playing an attorney that gets this very good personal injury case and does everything he can to win it. He's alcoholic and all these problems, and does all these things and finds all the right information, ends up winning this case that was an impossibility to win, and his life changes. And so that's what, when you're an advocate for someone, if you were being represented for murder or something that you didn't commit, you would want your attorney to talk to every witness, every person they could, to develop the case, to not give up, to go all out and try to get the best result possible. It's kind of an interesting movie that on Netflix recently, or show, the Menendez brothers, and you can kind of watch what Leslie Abrahams. And this is what all these movies and shows about attorneys are. They're about how they never give up, how they continue to look for new and new information. There's all these shows about cold case files and how the police and the detectives are out there doing everything that they can to find information to win. So this is how it works. I mean, you need to represent yourself and pretend like you're the client, not give up. You wouldn't want an attorney giving up on you. You wouldn't want a doctor giving up on you. You want them to keep trying new things. And so this perseverance in the face of resistance is incredibly important. I see attorneys just give up all the time. I don't know. I think it's the right idea. I think that if you really are dedicated to something, if you really enjoy practicing law, or you really want to be an attorney, you should never give up, because the legal profession and the world needs people that are persistent. Clients need people that are persistent. And this persistence that you learn, you can carry with you throughout your career. You give up after an unsuccessful interview. So I had one interview I was telling you about, where the person was asking all these questions, insulting me and stuff. I mean, it just was devastating. Sometimes people will give up after applying to just a huge firm with positions in their city, or when they've only looked at a few markets, and then they decide that they've been searching for a few months and there's not enough time to find a position. I get discouraged. When the market's bad, I get discouraged. I mean, because people aren't getting as many positions, and can be discouraged. So all these things can happen, and you can give up when you think you're going to get a job and don't get a job. It's what it is. I mean, sometimes you're hired and don't pass conflicts and you want to give up. And this is just what, happens. And you can get beat down, you can be discouraged, and you can get to the point where you have given up on the market completely. Like you can only work for yourself, even though you may not have a desire to do so, or you can only work as a contract attorney, or you need to leave the practice of law and do something else. And these are all things that are a form of giving up. But again, success can be right around the corner. If you don't give up and you keep moving forward, you're going to find exactly what you want. You just can't give up. And it's the same thing in anything. My suggestions are, if you feel like giving up, you need to look at more markets, you need to look at smaller firms, you look at different types of firms. And it's just part of being an attorney. Rejection you're facing is no different than any attorney experience. Even when you get senior and you're trying to get business, you're rejected by clients. All these things will get you rejected. So, too many people get dropped by their law firms, they lose jobs, never again work in large law firms, practice law. Your career can go away in a second. I talked to you about, the these Goodman Proctor attorneys didn't have to give up. They could have positions if they looked at other markets, if they looked outside of Boston and maybe decided to look at general commercial litigation as well as IP litigation. That's just a suggestion. There's all these things that you can find when you read what I've written and what other people have written about how to get away from this. But rejection is everywhere, and you need to make yourself open to other markets. I remember I had a guy that he'd been practicing at a major firm in Washington, D.C., doing international arbitration. It's a very, very niche practice area. And it got so bad, he had gone to one of the top 2 law schools in the country. He had lost his job and been able to find nothing. It got so bad that he decided he was going to be a doctor. So he spent a year studying to be a doctor and take those exams so he could take the MCATs and take other courses. And he spent a year doing that. And then he, all this time, for the first couple of years, he worked as a bartender while he was studying to take the MCATs. He took the MCATs. And then when he took the MCATs, he applied to medical schools, and he didn't get into a single medical school because, from what he understood, they didn't want to hire anybody that wanted to be a doctor as a second career. They were not open to it. And they wanted someone to have wanted to be a doctor from the beginning. Again, that persistence and focus. But he never gave up. He got in touch with me. He was certainly looking for these jobs in Washington, D.C., but he never got them. And then miraculously, he decided to apply to a position in Dubai and for doing international arbitration. He was hired. And how remarkable is that? And he moved to Dubai and had a job. So I've seen so many attorneys drop out of the practice of law, but the ones that stay in, often, great things can happen. You learn from bad interviews, you learn from not applying to places, and you can't give up. You need to proceed and realize that the longer you're in this, the more you have persistence and strategy, the more you're going to end up. And I hope this has been inspirational to you, just to tell you what you do, to leave your ego out of it. It's not you, it's the market. It's things the only thing you control is your resume and your drive. And this is what I do as a career. I try to motivate people and save their careers. Otherwise, a lot of times their careers will fall off the cliff. And people often do not want to listen to. They don't want to listen to me because they may think that they understand the market or they understand things better than I do. Sometimes they're afraid. Sometimes they're I don't know. There's all sorts of reasons. They decide that they will never work in a smaller firm. They own large firms. They decide that they can never move. And a lot of these people's careers end falling off the cliff. They're just trying to only work in major law firms, or they decided all these different things. And so rejection is something that anyone should be able to overcome. And if you don't give up and just keep in there and understand the rules that I've talked to you about today, and never let your ego get in your way, develop a plan to move ahead, just never give up. Rejection happens to everyone. And if you refuse to give up, then success is also something that will happen eventually. It can't help but happen to the person. You just can't help. It's going to happen. It may not be what you think. Like with me succeeding in this asphalt business, or the guy that didn't get into medical school after getting fired after 10 years from his firm doing international arbitration, and then never gave up and got a job in Dubai. This is what happens when people don't give up. Great things happen. And it's the, I guess some of the best advice I can give you is, if you're not succeeding, you just keep learning from your mistakes. You keep learning about how to fix your resume. Watch the resume. You have goals and you proceed, and all these great things that you can do that are going to make you successful if you do the right things. Okay, so we'll take a quick break right now just for a few minutes. When we come back, I will answer questions. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get to all the questions today, but I'll try to answer several of them. Unfortunately, today I'm getting ready to go on a trip, so I do have a limited amount of time to answer questions. But I will be back in just a minute or two, and then when I come back, we'll try to go through some of the most important questions. But great job so far being on this webinar. I think that also the questions are some of the most important ones. Really something that I hope everyone sticks around for. I've noticed that just about everyone, hundreds of people that are on this right now, that started stayed. So I commend you for spending the time to watch this and to learn all this information, because again, you're ahead of 99% of all people. This time you've spent here today really is something that changed the whole course of your career and your life, for you, for your self-esteem, for your family, and for the clients you ultimately represent. So thank you. We'll be back once. So we're back. Just give me 1 second. Okay, give me 1 second. Pull up the questions. Let's start. Okay. Second here. I'm trying to number them in order that they came in. Just see here. Order organizing these questions. Sorry. Sorry, give me 1 second. I apologize. Okay, questions. Okay, first question. If I don't have a strong book of business yet, how can I present myself as a valuable long-term asset to the firm? What specific skills or contributions should I focus on during interviews to demonstrate my potential in a law firm rather than going solo where I may face more challenges? Okay, so anytime law firms are not really concerned about you having a strong book of business until you start getting into kind of a senior associate counsel or contract attorney level. So really what law firms are looking for during your first 1 to 7 or 8 years of practice are for you to become an expert in a practice area and to work on kind of a certain caliber of client. So regardless of what you do, you need to be able to work. So law firms, essentially, if they're hiring you between 1 and 5 or 6 years, they're not really concerned about business. They're concerned about having people to do the work. That's kind of the most important thing to understand when you're interviewing at a more junior level. Now, if you're senior and don't have business, many times the only reason the law firm's going to hire you is if they have work. So attorneys do all these things a lot of times when they don't have business. And they're senior, they do business plans and how they're going to generate revenue and so forth. And those can be useful to some extent. And law firms may give you a little bit of a runway to do that. But in most cases, the law firms are not going to be that concerned about business if they're hiring you. It's just, there's nothing that you can do if you don't have it. Now, sometimes what I've seen a lot of working with a couple of junior partners at the moment, and I was working with one guy and he had a $700,000 book of business, which for the type of and he was a 12, 13-year attorney, for the type of caliber of the firms he wanted to work at, that was not nearly enough. And so I kept in touch with him and we've been touching base every few months. And he recently came back to me and he said, wow, I just brought in this big case that has a budget of like $1 million over the next 6 months. So now he has a $1 million plus going towards $2 million book of business. And so that's helping them. So I think that if you don't have business and you're becoming more senior in your own firm, what I would always recommend people do is they try to get business right now, meaning they build up a book of business where they're at, and then they think about moving then. And that's really one of the most important things you can do is you get that book of business now, and you try to build it up your existing firm, and you keep improving it, and that enables you to move later. I remember there was a woman in our Chicago office that started off working with this woman when she was an associate, and moved her as a senior associate. And she said, she was at kind of a smaller firm, like not quite mid-sized, and said, what do I need to do to get into like a better mid-sized firm? So we're going to have to get at least $1 million book of business. And when you have that, come back to me. So sure enough, a year and a half later, she came back and she had $1 million book of business. So she moved and she said, my goal is to work at this Latham and Watkins firm in Chicago. What do I need to get to work there? And she said, we're going to need at least $5 million. So, 2 years later, she had $3 million. And then she was starting to get in the ballpark. And so she moved again to a better mid-sized firm. And then a year and a half later, she had $4.5 million. She didn't get an interview with Latham, but she got an interview and some interviews with AmLaw 100 law firms and ended up getting a job with one of those. Now, I don't know if she ever got into Latham and Watkins, but what I will tell you is that she was very, very smart and she learned how to develop a book of business over time, and she got better and better at it. So she stayed at her existing firm to develop that book of business. And eventually that ended up, creating making her and helping her be very, very successful eventually. Okay, you highlighted how inconsistent job history as a major red flag for law firms. I've made a few lateral moves early in my career to find the right practice area. How can I effectively explain these transitions during an interview without coming across as unstable or unreliable? Okay, so those reasons for moving are actually very good. So I'll tell you why. What happens is a lot of times you may be joining a firm, and the firm that you join, they have you working on more than one practice area, or you're kind of more of a generalist, or that firm may have you specializing in, and not a great niche in that practice area, meaning you may be working on something more general as opposed to something more specific. So what does that mean? It means that maybe you want to do, I don't know, intellectual property litigation. I'm going to talk about that today, but you're doing a mix of commercial litigation and intellectual property litigation. So you move to a firm that only does that. So if the firms can see a progression on your resume from doing one thing to becoming more and more specialized, that's very good. If the law firm can see a pattern of you moving from one law firm that's okay in your practice area to one that's much better to one that's even better than that, meaning probably that they work on larger clients and they have more attorneys that are doing it, then that can be a very good way of doing things. So if you don't have a consistent, if your background isn't, if you're moving to better and better firms, that often can be a good sign that you're getting better experience and you're trying to move up and you're becoming a better attorney. So what you're talking about here, trying to find the right practice area, is very, very good. Now, you talked about something here of looking unstable or unreliable. And what does that mean? That means that there's no focus to your resume in a lot of cases. So one of the things that I like to see, and you'll see if you watch the resume review videos that I do, one of the things that I think is very important is actually showing a focus in your practice area, meaning that you look like you've been doing mainly one thing your entire career. So law firms want to hire specialists. Just one second. So law firms, I apologize for that. Law firms want to see a focus in one practice area. So if your first firm, you were doing litigation and corporate, your second firm, you were doing litigation and tax, and then your third firm, you're only doing litigation, you would want to look like you would want to highlight just litigation in all three jobs. You wouldn't want to look inconsistent in the practice area because that just looks like you're bouncing around. So let me just show you kind of how that works. So either three or job three, maybe litigation and some real estate on dispute. Two, litigation corporate. Maybe you really want to know nothing about litigation corporate. Job one, litigation, bankruptcy. Okay. So if you want to look good to a law firm when you're applying for jobs, it does not look good to them for you to have been doing a bunch of different things. Like that makes it look like you're not an expert in litigation. So what a lot of people do on their resumes is they think, well, these law firms are going to be very, very impressed with all the things that I've done. And that could not be further from the truth. Law firms hire specialists, just as clients hire. So you would not want to hire a doctor for your brain cancer that did brain cancer and orthopedic surgery, but in the last job, and then previous to that, they did neurology and foot surgery. I mean, you just, people want to hire experts. That's what clients want. And law firms typically will need experts in one practice area. So what I typically recommend doing with resumes like this, and this one example could literally make you get 10 times more interviews, is the only thing you really want to talk about in your resume is your experience related to litigation. You can put a line or two at the end talking about bankruptcy or corporate, but law firms aren't going to be impressed. They're only going to be impressed if they have a litigation job for someone that does real estate, right? I mean, does litigation. And then other things people do that are stupid is they will start saying things like pro bono hours, completely unrelated to working in a law firm. I mean, they'll start talking about all these other things that really aren't that important. Or they'll talk about tasks they did in litigation that aren't really that great. Like, oh, I just did e-discovery. I saw a resume the other day from someone that had been an AmLaw at a law firm. And the resume talked about how they did e-discovery, which is just one little portion of litigation, not great experience, and then how they did a bunch of pro bono. So people need to look at your resume and get a sense of focus in your practice area. If you've changed practice areas, well, talk about whatever is related to litigation that you did in your first job. If you're doing primarily bankruptcy, talk about litigation. If you were doing corporate and bankruptcy, right, like this could happen too. You're doing corporate and bankruptcy and you want to be a litigator. And here you were doing, I don't know, you're doing litigate, you were doing, you basically, what you do in this situation is you just don't even describe your experience. You just call yourself an associate, whatever it is. I mean, there's no need to go into a lot of detail about something that's going to take people off the scent. So law firms are asking, like, what scent is this taking me on? What scent is this resume taking me on? So, where am I going? Like, what is happening to this person? Like, what's the scent of what their resume is showing? And if the scent is not towards being a litigator, then they're not going to hire you for a litigation job if you mix it up. So your resume needs to look like all litigation. And then sometimes people will list all these previous jobs that they've had prior to law school or whatever that don't look litigation related. They might say they were an accountant for 10 years or whatever. They want to be a litigator. You de-emphasize things that have nothing to do with your current practice, with what you're trying to do, or eliminate them entirely from your resume. Now, this particular piece of advice is one of the most common mistakes that attorneys make on their resumes. So hopefully you'll take a lot from this and it will help you. And we've actually proved these for you. So my assistant was writing these down during the call. I understand that poor academic performance for not attending a top law school could be a reason law firms pass on candidates. If this is my situation, what specific steps can I take to demonstrate my potential value to a law firm, especially when competing against candidates with more prestigious academic backgrounds? Okay, so there's nothing you can do when you're a young attorney. Like, what do you do? How can you, if your grades aren't as good and your school isn't as good and there's other people applying for the same jobs that have that much better, how can you possibly overcome that? I mean, there's nothing you can do. I mean, again, I'm not raining in your parade, but there's not a lot that you can do when you're in that situation, because the only thing that firms have to judge you on, and the law firms judge you on coming out of school, are your grades in law school, right? So that's it. So that's all they have to judge you on. Now, that's just when you're coming out of law school, but the situation is far different when you get older, because when you get older, grades in law school fade into the background, and experience starts to matter. So what does that mean? So if you come out of law school in year one, there may be, so year one, example, year one, undergrads, maybe about 10 go into real estate. Then, after 5 years, only 2 left. So, and it's like that for all law schools. So, meaning only 2 currently practicing real estate inside of law firms. So it becomes much easier for you because it's just scarcity. The longer you're out, the more likely there's going to be fewer people you're competing with. And the law firms are really only looking at your experience, the number of people that do that practice area in a given location. So time is actually on your side, because when you come out of law school, the only thing they can look at are your grades. But after 5 years, they're looking at your experience, and they're more concerned with, do you have the ability to do the work? Are you well trained? And all those sorts of things. It's very common for patent attorneys to come out of law school with bad grades for a variety of reasons, because they're engineers and they work in engineering while they're in law school and they don't have the best grades. But then they get jobs with small law firms. And then after a few years, they have all this expertise and law firms can't find it. So they hire them even though they didn't go to the best law schools. And because there's just not a lot of them in the market. There's all sorts of other things that create scarcity, like the amount of people taking the patent bar and so forth. So if you want to be in a large law firm and you didn't go to the best school, the most important thing you can do is get experience in a practice area that large law firms do. So large law firms typically concentrate on things like corporate and real estate and all these different practice areas. And then they, getting into one of those practice areas, if you get the experience, is very, very good. Now, there's other practice areas where it's always going to be difficult for you to get into a large law firm if you don't have experience. So one example would be tax law. Like, there's not a lot of tax lawyers out there. There's more tax lawyers working in accounting firms and so forth than there are jobs in law firms by, let's say, a factor of 20. So anytime there's not a lot of tax openings. So even if you do get the experience, it's difficult, but it's dependent upon things like your practice area, your location. So, but grades will fade over time and experience matters. So what does a young attorney do to get that experience? You start your job at one firm, and then you try to move to a better firm. And then you try to move to a better firm after that and get better experience. And then over time, that experience is going to pay a lot more dividends than any type of work you may be doing right now. Than your law school. So experience always matters in the long run. And then after experience, of course, is the ability to generate business. That can help as well. I'm in the mid-stage of my career and currently don't have a significant client base. What strategies can I implement to build and maintain a solid book of business, especially when law firms seem to expect this from our senior attorneys? Well, as a senior attorney, I can't. This is not a webinar about how to develop business. I have done those. I would recommend, if you can, to watching some of those. But if you don't have a significant client base, you have to increase that client base. So you do all the things that have gotten you a good book of business, or somewhat of a book of business, and you try to build upon it. Persistent, learn about building business. You work harder. One of the, Elon Musk always says that, if somebody is working 40 hours a week, if you want to succeed, you need to work 80. So you need to, because one person is doing the work of two if they're building 80, working 80 as opposed to 40. So I know attorneys that have developed monumentally large books of business with, 20, $30 million. And those attorneys, when they were younger, they build 2,000 hours a year, and they spend another 2,000 hours a year in client development. This is what people do that really want it. And you're not going to build a book of business just by sitting around and hoping it's going to come. You need to go out and chase it and learn how to do it. It's no different than learning how to find a mate. What do? You figure out ways to do it that are going to work. Okay, how can I strategically select firms that align with my specific practice area and career goals without simply applying to hundreds of random firms? Could you provide tips on balancing quality and quantity applications? Okay, so if you are in a practice area, regardless of what it is, you can research firms that do work in that practice area. So you can search for litigation firms in a given city or corporate firms in a different city and get all sorts of list of firms. It's not really that complicated. It's I'll just show you an example here. Give me 1 second. And I do this example in most of my webinars, but I'll do it again just so you can kind of get a sense of how that works. So if you want to do, bankruptcy, say commercial litigation, Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to be you, but I'm just showing you how many different types of places there are that you potentially can work. And these are all different lists of litigation law firms and places in Nebraska. These applications that you would send out would be focused. You can look at all the businesses that do it here in Lincoln, Nebraska. You can look at all the things that come up with Google. And then you go to these websites and you would apply to the places that look like they could be the best fit for you. They would do the kind of work you do. That's what you would do. And then if you wanted to work in, cities, and I'm just giving this example because so many people do this. But cities in Wisconsin, you could do a similar search and search for different areas for different people. A town with 12,000 people probably has some people that do trust in the states or whatever. And you search in different towns and in the state you're licensed, you want to work, and then you search for attorneys there. So like I said before, there are tens of thousands of law firms all over the country in different areas. And so if you needed to work in Wisconsin, you could apply to these firms. If you wanted to work in, regardless of the market you wanted to work in, you can find cities and do searches for firms on Google. And Google, by the way, is a tremendous resource. It used to be that the only resource trying to find law firms would be firms that were in this thing called Martindale-Hubbell, and you had to actually pay to have a listing in Martindale-Hubbell. I think it was like $600 a year for a solo practitioner, $250 for each additional attorney for smaller firms. And so the only firms that were advertising were the ones that had the budget for it. But as Martindale-Hubbell went away, then you started to get all these lists online of the best attorneys. And then Google started searching for firms in different locations. And so Google is just an amazing resource for you to find places that you potentially could work, and you should be doing this. There are more than enough opportunities for any attorney to get a job out there if you're focused and you're looking at different types of places. How do you, when you find one of these firms, how do you know who to apply to? Well, this particular firm in Nebraska even has a career site, right? So, and then they may have openings. I don't know. You can email this person to see if they have any jobs. There's just all of these potential places that you can work in. I just clicked on a random person in Nebraska. This is just how it works. There's opportunities everywhere. BCG has lists. There's so many lists of firms and places you can work that it's mind blowing, and very few people do this. So this firm is called Johnson Fledman. They have a contact page for their attorneys. Then these are their attorneys. So the name is Johnson Fledman. So I would go here, then you have Johnson, and you can send Johnson an email asking them if they might have a need for someone like you doing this practice area that he does. What does he do? Litigation. Okay, so he does general litigation, personal injury, medical law practice. You could apply to him, or you could apply to maybe Johnson looks like he's close to retirement, so maybe apply to Floodman. I mean, you just get yourself out there and you apply to the people that are most likely to to hire you. And very few people do this. And I'm just telling you, it works. And this is strategic. It's your product. You should market your product. The wider audience you ought to market it to, the more places there are to sell to. And what does any business do that wants to expand or find more opportunities? They try to find opportunities where other people aren't finding those opportunities. So what I just showed you just now is something that 99.5% of attorneys aren't doing. And because they're not doing that, 99.5% of attorneys aren't finding jobs. And that those firms that we just looked at do commercial litigation if that's what you want to do. So making sure that you're covering the market. I mean, if you want to work, why wouldn't you do everything you could to find a place where you could work? From your experience, how can attorneys with more niche specialties, such as environmental law or intellectual property, balance the need to cast a wide net while focusing on firms that truly value their expertise? I think this is kind of the same question. Is there a sweet spot for attorneys based on the number of applications? So there's all sorts of things that you can do if you're in a niche specialty. I do not consider intellectual property much of a niche specialty anymore because there's so many firms that do it, but environmental law definitely is. And there's all sorts of environmental law firms. There's environmental law firms that do environmental defense. There's environmental law firms that do environmental plaintiffs work. I mean, they're just all over the map. There's all sorts of different environmental law firms which they could work for. So what do? I mean, you do the same thing I showed you earlier. You search for firms in whatever markets you want to work in that do the type of environmental work you want to do. Now, what's interesting about your question of environmental law, which I'll share here with you real briefly again, is a lot of times in all of these practice areas, you will have different types of work that's potentially being done by law firms. So what does that mean? So there's different types of environmental law. So you can go to different types of, and this is kind of interesting, environmental law. You should understand this for every practice area. So you have, I mean, just look at this. You have endangered species, clean water, federal insecticide, clean water, climate change, air pollution. So sometimes an environmental attorney will have experience in one of these things. They might have experience with toxic substances or the Safe Water Drinking Act. So what's interesting you can do here, and the same thing with intellectual property law, is maybe you have experience working on the Clean Water Act, and that's the majority of your environmental experience. So that's going to be very interesting to law firms that potentially may have that kind of work coming in. So, Clean Water Act. So you could, just an example, law firms that practice the Clean Water Act. So here all of a sudden you get this California water attorneys, water law, Myers-Nave, Melvini, Best and Krieger, Nossaman, like all these firms, Chronic, all these firms that do this kind of work. Now it's just showing me in California, but I mean, this is crazy. So if I was a Clean Water Act attorney, this would probably be a very, very smart thing for me to do, is to try to apply to a lot of these firms that have that kind of experience. And this is something that most people don't do. So interesting fact, and I hope you wrote this down again and understand it. You may have experience doing work with one of these environmental types of environmental work. You may have experience in, let's see, different types of litigations. So you have all these different types of litigation. Now, there's probably a lot more than this, but if you are class action, you find law firms that do class action. If you're product liability, you find law firms that do product liability, fraud, all these different sorts of things. You have to focus your resume in your search on firms that do the different types of whatever the type of law you have experience doing. So different types of real estate lawyers. So here it's the different, the same thing. It's here. We used to have a section for this. I know we have it on BCG, but I mean, look at this. Like I'm in Malibu, and this is Malibu real estate attorney. I mean, and then there's all of these different sources of information about what, real estate, different types of real estate, different types of real estate. So to answer your question, you have people that deal with property law and different types of property law. There's all this. You have people that deal with, landlord tenant law. So the smartest thing you can do as an attorney is to make sure that you're focusing your search to firms that may do the type of work you do be experts in, especially if that's related to a niche. So real estate litigation, for example, there's real estate plaintiffs litigation, and there's real estate defense litigation. So having the ability to focus your resume on your experience, a practice area that is a niche in your practice area, is a way to really focus your resume. And it's actually very interesting because I've seen a lot of cases where someone just has this little niche on their resume of something that they do, and then maybe there's like 15 or 10 or 5 law firms in the country that they can do the type of work, and then they focus their resume on that aspect of the practice area, and then they apply sometimes out of state and all these different things, and they focus on that and ends up really kind of transforming other job searches and getting them jobs that they normally wouldn't get because they focus their applications on subspecialties. So I would just say here some subspecialties is within your practice area. That's often one of the best way of thinking about it. So can you have a resume that's focused on subspecialties within your practice area as opposed to not? So some resumes you may have a resume if you're applying to a firm that does nothing but that subspecialty is very strong. And then you may have a generalist resume if you're applying to things that aren't generalist. If the market in my practice area is slow, is it advisable to temporarily pivot to a different practice area? And how can I effectively position myself for that switch without seeming indecisive or lacking expertise in my primary field? Should I highlight certain transferable skills on my resume or during? Okay, so switching to a different practice area is usually not a good idea. It can work, like maybe your first 3 years of practice, but once you switch to a different practice area, you're going to be in a position where you're learning about a new practice area, and it's no different than coming out of law school and returning. Now, you may get some transferable skills into your new practice area, but often not. There's some things you can do to keep yourself employed in your practice area. You can apply to a firm where you'd be more of a generalist and doing other types of practice areas as opposed to your existing one. That can sometimes help. So you could apply to, if you're a corporate attorney doing M&A, you could apply to a corporate firm where you're doing M&A, corporate generalist work, and all this other types of stuff, and that keeps you focused. If you're one kind of a niche litigator, you can apply to firms where you do different types of litigation. But regardless of if your practice area is slow, city you're in, there's always going to be smaller law firms that have work. There's always going to be firms in different markets that have work. So you need to chase the work. I mean, there's a difference between, like, if you're selling a house, like, is the market chasing you? I mean, are there all these offers and people coming in to look at your house? Or are you chasing the market? Is your house just sitting there and nothing's happening? So you always want to be in a position, to the extent you can, where maybe the market's chasing you. And so what does it mean if the market's chasing you? If the market's chasing you, it means that there are, there's not a lot of people like you, that there's work for you, that you're a scarcity in whatever the market you're applying is. And so sometimes that means going to work in smaller markets, or to broaden your search, or going to work in firms where you can still focus on your practice area, but instead of being completely focused on one aspect of your practice area, you can do different parts of it. Okay, for law students, how should we approach choosing a practice area in law school to avoid slow markets after graduation? Are there any proactive steps we need to hedge our bets if we're passionate about an area that might have strong demand at the moment? Okay, great question. So I'm going to, real quickly, I'll do a share of my screen. Jobs. Okay, I don't know if this is what I want to do. I'm going to share a different screen. I hope everyone is. Okay, so the practice area you select is actually very important. When you come out of law school, you have to think about what practice area is going to make me the safest long term. Like, where are the most jobs? Where's my skill going to be the most transferable? Where am I going to be able to have long-term success practice? So, you have to be careful a lot of times of some of these niche practice areas like art and museum or antitrust or alcohol beverage. There's just never going to be a lot of openings for those types of things. Cannabis law used to be a big one, but now that's kind of going away. So that would be dangerous. Different types of bankruptcy are going to be in demand at different points in time. So obviously bankruptcy is often very dependent on the state of the economy. So that can be a risky practice area. You have construction, which is actually a pretty good practice area. Even though it's niche, there's always kind of under litigation, like a lot of different types of dispute with defects in general. So that's actually a pretty good practice area. Corporate can be risky. It's risky because different things can slow down. but there's always kind of a demand for corporate generalists somewhere and people with very good corporate experience. The nice thing about corporate that makes it a good practice area for a lot of people is you can get skills that make it much easier to go in-house than you might get in other practice areas. And it's also a practice area where if you're very, very dedicated, many times you'll be able to build in business, which is bring business. Criminal defense is an example of a practice area where there's always going to be work. A lot of people want to go into data privacy. That's a very risky practice area because that's kind of what, at least a couple of years ago, was like an in vogue practice area. And then the demand for it is going down. Education law, same thing, but different. This is actually a very good practice area because school districts and school boards and higher education and suing schools and representing this practice area would be a very good one for a junior attorney to go into. Energy is very risky because you have, they're going to be a demand for these different types of attorneys at different points in time. Oil and gas tends to fluctuate a lot. It can be a very scary practice area. Entertainment is also the same thing. It's a very niche practice area. There's a lot more attorneys that want to do it than jobs. I talked about environmental earlier, but you can see here you have different types of environmental. So you have like land use and zoning, and litigation and transaction. If you did want to go into environmental, I'd recommend land use and zoning. This is a very good practice area to be in. It doesn't matter the law school you went to often. And a lot of times what's nice about it is law firms will hire people that can come in and work on the firm's work. So institutional clients. So that can be very good. I've seen people that didn't go to the greatest law schools doing that. Family law is good. There's always going to be divorces and things. People that do that do very well. Finance is this kind of area where it can be very difficult. So project finance means building these large pieces of infrastructure and things that can fluctuate, and all these different types of finance can make it difficult for attorneys to stay employed. Food and drug law is another niche practice area. Not a lot of firms do it, so that's not always a great thing. Franchise law, great niche practice area, but again, not a lot of firms will do it, but there's kind of always demand for it. General practice, you're always going to have demand for something. So that typically is in smaller markets, need generalists. The reason smaller markets use generalists is because there's just not enough clients that need specific types of work. All this government stuff can be very difficult to get employed in, more niche practice area. Healthcare has always been a good practice area. So what other type of healthcare, that would be a very good practice area for a young attorney to go into. Immigration is often very, very good for young attorneys. There's always work, but the pay is kind of limited. Insurance, you have insurance coverage is a good practice area. Not as many jobs, but it's a good practice area. There's always demand, especially even for senior attorneys without business. Insurance defense is a good practice area. There's always a demand for insurance defense attorneys, but the amount of money that's paid is typically very low. Same thing with plaintiffs work. There's always plaintiffs work available. So under insurance, this is one of the best practice areas people can ever go into. But again, the pay is going to be limited. IP litigation is very dangerous. Patent, trademark is very dangerous. Not enough jobs. Patent is also become a little bit dangerous because a lot of that work is being done now by attorneys overseas that kind of present the work to a U.S. attorney to sign off on. Same thing with labor and employment is also a very good practice area. There's always labor and employment work, whether it's for plaintiffs or defense, it's a good practice area. You have all these types of litigation that a new attorney can go into. But typically, your best type of litigation is going to be anything that's general or criminal is good. I showed you kind of some of the different ones, but commercial is always a good practice area. There's always going to be commercial litigation work. Mass torts can kind of go up and down, but there's always plaintiffs work for mass torts attorneys. Medical malpractice is always going on. Personal injury is always going on. Product liability is generally going on all the time. People are suing people for products. Professional liability, which means representing doctors and lawyers and things that are sued for doing something wrong. And then out of the rest of these, workers' compensation is also always going on. That's a good practice area. And then you have these different types of municipal law. These are kind of the same thing, kind of always going on with real estate evictions and foreclosures. And again, more municipal law. Real estate is kind of risky, but again, it's always going on. So it's just, do you get the work at a big firm or a small firm? There's always going to be commercial transactions, but depending on the interest rates and everything, that can have an impact on things. But real estate general is good. Residential transactions are always going on. And then tax, very difficult. Telecommunications, difficult. Trust in estates, very, very good practice area. So that's kind of a breakdown of the practice areas if you're not in law school. But typically the ones that are going to be the best to go after are going to be practice areas where there's kind of always jobs, where the practice area isn't so niche that it's going to be difficult for you to find a job. Okay, well, thank you for being on this webinar. Apologize if this was a little bit long. I would have liked to some more questions, but I think during the course of the webinar, my system was able to kind of narrow these down towards the end of the ones that seemed like they were the best. But I appreciate you being here, and I will talk to everyone again next week.